Welcome back to another edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. I'm Tim O'Malley, joined today by Tim Priester of Irish Illustrated and John Bryce of Football Scoop. And since we last met, Mike Martin was officially named, not officially named, named by us as Notre Dame's new general manager to replace Chad Bowden. And we were going to lead with that, guys, until about 2 minutes and 50 seconds left in Notre Dame's otherwise innocuous basketball loss to Louisville last night when head coach Micah Shrewsbury, not really even prompted about the crowd, but just asked by Blue and Gold's Jack Sobel. Thankfully, he asked this question because otherwise that press conference would have ended about 3 minutes in with me asking about dribbling. Uh, Jack Sobel simply asked, 10 and 10 at one point. It's been uneven and a little bit downhill since then. What's wrong? In the final 2 minutes, if you haven't heard it yet, was Micah Shrewsbury frustration and anger with the lack of fan support. He said, put it on him, not the players. And four rants, Tim Priester, you come up with in the last 2
Yeah,
years?
maybe it's only three. I thought it was four. I thought it was two last year, and that was the second one this year. But I just don't know. Like I don't understand the direction of it. It's your players performing so poorly and essentially being coached so poorly to play that bad that I mean that's the cause of it. That's why the fans don't show up. And we've talked for years about Notre Dame basketball fans, even when they're pretty good. They're not very good, the fans that is. But when the product is as horrible as it was last night, once again against a man, I at one point I texted you, Tim, and said it's like Louisville's like that's Cirque du Soleil performing out there, and I don't know what Notre Dame is, but these guys are acrobats playing above the rim, and Notre Dame's just trailing behind.
Yeah, it was abysmal. I think the root issue for the fan apathy is that a year ago we saw this team fight and scratch and claw and be in games that it didn't have a lot of business being in. And this year we're seeing a product that continues to regress. And last year everyone understood the limitations of the roster and what he had inherited, and that Notre Dame had been on a downward trajectory when Micah Shrewsbury hired. You're rarely ever hired into a position because things are going great. But I mean, the basketball program was in the exact opposite place of the football program when Marcus Freeman got hired. And so I think people were willing to have patience, but as people texted me last night and in previous games, the patience runs out a lot sooner when it appears that the team has no interest in being there, or no interest in efforting, or no interest in defense. And those are supposed to be hallmarks of a Micah Shrewsbury coach team. I thought his rant, frankly, was ridiculous. I didn't see a need for it. Jack's question was certainly fair. And we still don't know the answer to it either. By the way, Jack asked a good question. How'd you go?
He didn't
How'd you
respond.
go from 10 and 10 to 11 and 14? What's not happening? And instead of that, we get a rant about the fans and saying they've given up on the players. Well, the, who hasn't maybe given up on this season? That's what we're waiting to see.
And it's interesting. We've been going to games for a long time, and Tim, when you said they haven't had great fan support, you mean the last quarter century? Of course, it has been that way.
Yeah, I grew up,
Yeah,
I grew up
yeah,
in a
they had amazing fan
a
support.
really
Yeah,
hostile environment. You did
but
too.
it's been a long time. There's a reason that Mike Bray, say he coached 400 home games, it's about 390 home games, 200 conference games, Big East and ACC. I'm just doing round numbers. He would often say after the wins, our crowd was fabulous. 5% of those crowds were fabulous. The other ones was Mike Bray in his own way, pleading with the fans to help out a little bit more. And it was a good way. It's the right way of going about it. Now, he was winning. Shrewsbury is very upset. I think that what everybody else feels is just regression from. They had a calling card last year, as JB started pointing out. Underdogs, scrappy, defensive minded, smart. You may beat us because we're not there yet, but you're going to feel it. And you're going to get out of here thinking that was harder than it was supposed to be. And I don't think that exists right now. The rant was odd because Louisville's not that far away. They had some red. I've seen so much more fan support in that building. And let's throw IU out because that's ridiculous. Obviously, IU used to take over. But when Duke and North Carolina come, there's more fans than Louisville had. Louisville just had some fans because Notre Dame didn't have enough, and the student section was very strange last night. It was mostly the band. We could have counted them with our little sardonic fingers, like I always like to do. I thought the crowd across from the benches was fairly sizable for a winter wonderland 8 o'clock Sunday night. I didn't think it was that bad. They have nothing to cheer for, Tim.
Yeah, he's ranted about his players before,
Sure.
certainly, and the players deserved it at that time. Your reference about Mike Bray saying that the crowd was fabulous. I think one time after he said that in a press conference, I said, "You're being very generous when you say that."
Yes,
And that was, and he'd smile because
because
he
he
knew
knows.
that he was being generous with it. But and again, he usually yells about the players, and now he wanted to direct it somewhere else, and he falls on the sword, by saying that, if you think I stink, I don't really care or whatever. But the dribbling, good God Almighty, just dribbling and dribbling and dribbling. Tim, you and I were
Three assists when it
three,
mattered
three,
in the game.
yeah, three, yeah, exactly. And I mean, you and I grew up as basketball players, and everybody always knows that the more you dribble and the less you pass, the worse your offense is. I mean, that's a basketball rule from the inception of the game. And that, this was supposed to be the year where, hey, we've got a whole lot more offense. We're not even going to address defense during the summer. He admitted that. And it looked like they would have a whole bunch more offense. And what did they end up with, 60 points last night or whatever it was? They don't have a lot of offense. What'd you say? 30 minutes in which only two players, Davis and
And
Burton,
Marcus
scored a
Burton
bet.
scored a basket. Kebajai hit 2 free throws in that 30-minute span. It was about 15 minutes to go in the first half. Braden Shrewsbury hit his third three in four
Yeah,
attempts with
yeah.
5 minutes gone in the game. He didn't hit another
He,
one again until it didn't matter when they were down by
27
15.
seconds, I think, were left when
Yeah,
he hit his next one.
JB, I think you were on here when Tim Priester sent me a text pre or during the press conference. The dribbling, the incessant dribbling, I wrote, that's actually my lead. And it couldn't be my lead anymore because of the rant. But yeah, I think when you announce that people want you fired and you're going to turn it around is probably a bad sign in the middle of year two.
Yeah,
That,
I think it's there's nothing that's a good sign about where this program is right now. And though it wasn't a rant, his whole thing about putting it on me last night was almost verbatim what he said 8 days ago. If you'll remember, when I asked him after the come from ahead loss to Virginia Tech, what gave him the belief that they could get it turned it around, that it was in this team to turn it around. And he talked about putting it on him and said, I own this. This is all on me. We are the team good enough to get the leads. We're also the other team that's bad enough to blow the leads. And I think one more thing that has to be mentioned about last night, about how galling it should be for Notre Dame, is that that's year one for Pat Kelsey at Louisville. And they're going to be a tournament team. They're in the top third of the ACC conference standings. And furthermore, they hired him away from College of Charleston, not a power conference major program. Now, Penn State's not a great basketball program and never has been. But again, Micah Shrewsbury should have come into this situation with his NBA experience and his head coaching experience in a rugged power conference, far better position to be doing at Notre Dame what Pat Kelsey is doing at Louisville. And I understand Louisville has some admissions, some
but they're
admissions.
graduate transfers, JB. Those are mostly grad transfers when you look at who they gained. I mean, they're seniors and 22-year-olds, so that's not,
Yeah,
I think they
yeah,
got in after graduating from college.
yeah. There you go. So anyway, I think you can't ignore the dichotomy of that.
I we should go on to football now. What I did want to say is, there a stat? There's a stat for everything. Is there a stat for dribbles per possession?
Well, I thought about it during the
I want
game,
to.
but I decided I didn't want to pay attention enough. But now I wish I had. But then I would have been mad because the final 2 minutes and 50 seconds of the press conference was all I needed. And Jack Sobel, I guess, owes Notre Dame a new microphone because that was the end of the press conference when Micah Shrewsbury smashed it for not answering his very logical question.
Whose Mike was that?
I think it's Notre Dame's Mike, right? It's right in front of him at the at the podium. Mike Martin will be Notre Dame's new general manager. That was the big news we had. I think for people that don't know anything about Mike Martin or don't know anything about the hiring process here, I think when you go to Detroit Lions, a guy that helped mold the Detroit Lions into what they are in terms of personnel today, it's a good starting off point, JB.
It's a great starting off point, and this is no revisionist history. I think this will bear out as a great hire for Notre Dame. I think that this is probably in a lot of ways, especially for how Notre Dame is going to approach this. I know we got some questions about it. I think this is a better fit, or more natural fit. Mike Martin has 2 decades in the NFL, 2 decades of experience in the NFL and scouting departments and personnel departments and things like that. And he played in the SEC, and graduated cum laude from Vanderbilt, so no small feat there. But I just think it's a really, really strong hire. They brought him in, as we detailed, and I'd alluded on Thursday's podcast. I said, hey, Notre Dame has its top GM target in town. They're hosting someone from the NFL. So we had alluded to that on the Thursday pod. Brought him in Tuesday night, put him up for a couple of nights at the Morris Inn. He had his wife with him. He had a day-long slate of meetings. He met with everyone from academic compliance to the scouting department to Matt Jansen and Carter Allman and Caleb Davis and all the folks in recruiting and Becca Seitz, and really immersed himself in that. He had one-on-one time with Pete Bavacqua, is my understanding, then had a lengthy one-on-one meeting with Marcus Freeman inside the Goog, and then they wrapped things up with dinner in the Chivarelli Lounge, and they offered him the job that night. And by Thursday, he knew he was going to accept it when he was driving back home, and that's when all the news got out on Friday. But a really, really strong hire. I believe it's a 3-year contract, and big commitment by Notre Dame, and they had to make a big commitment to get him out of the NFL, because not only has he done really great things for the Lions, but that's a high-profile franchise right now because of how well they're playing on the field.
I think there are a lot of things to like about Mike Martin, and I'll start with his background being a defensive back at Vanderbilt from 99 to 2003. And as you said, John cum laude, so he's a guy that can understand what the student athlete is dealing with at Notre Dame. I love that. I love the fact that he spent 11 seasons with the Texans, with a great background there. And then everything that the Lions are touching has turned to gold here, I guess, except for a little bit of postseason play the last couple of years. But yeah, I just think that on many fronts, Mike Martin is an excellent choice for Notre Dame. And again, this is why we always say don't overreact, or you don't need to overreact when a candidate falls through. James Blanchard was an excellent candidate. Chad Bowden was excellent at his job. Well, Notre Dame now has Mike Martin, and things look really, really good. So I think a lot of times a lack of knowledge creates angst when it comes to losses with Notre Dame and any other school. I think this is a really, really good fit for Notre Dame, and I'm looking forward to having an opportunity to spend some time talking to him about the position.
And right or wrong, this was my vision for general manager at Notre Dame, the player personnel, the analyst of a football player position that can go now separate from, and we're going to talk about this in the second segment. Doesn't mean I'm right. It just means I always thought the Bill Reese at Notre Dame scouting players, then you have to exponentially go. It's tougher now with the portal era and everything you have to do. It is. Bill Reese was kind of like the Mike Martin light in terms of his role. Mike Martin's going to have a lot more responsibilities than Bill Reese, but you always felt confident that you had a NFL director of player personnel in that spot for Notre Dame, and now they can kind of branch off into 2 different roles, I think. 8 Irish players invited to the Combine. We'll talk about the one I expected, or had hoped would be. I guess I didn't expect Jordan Clark to be invited, but those going: Riley Leonard, Bo Collins, Mitchell Evans from the offense, Xavier Watts and Benjamin Morrison, Jack Kaiser, Cross, and an injured Riley Mills from the defense. We're going to have a lot of Combine coverage coming up at Irish Illustrated that has become its season into itself. But I guess first thoughts, guys, on maybe Jordan Clark or anybody else you thought could go, and then who might shine really from that group in Indianapolis.
Go ahead, TP.
Well, is there something about Nichols that they get shortchanged in the Combine? It seems to be the case with Notre Dame. I don't know if that's pervasive throughout all of college football, but clearly Thomas Harper. And look, there's a finite number of spots. There's podcasts being recorded all over the country right now saying, about the guy from Oklahoma State that got left out or the guy from Missouri that got left out. I understand that there's a finite number of spots. And I don't know how static that is, but it probably generally stays about the same each year. By the way, Irish Illustrated's Drew Mentok will be attending the combine this year, as he did last year, and I think maybe the year before. And so we'll have some up-to-date stuff on these guys. But it just seems like Notre Dame's nickels get shortchanged a little bit, especially when Bo Collins is invited. I would have invited Jordan Clark. And again, I don't know if
Right.
there's a
Bo
number
Collins is
based
going to
upon.
test really well though, and
Well,
that
that's true.
could be
No,
part of the
that's true. And Riley Leonard will test well. I think Mitchell Evans for the size and position will test well. Jack Kaiser we know will, because he does excel at that. Yeah, I don't know that Howard Cross will, just because of the lack of measurables and stuff. But hey, eight's a pretty good number. There are a lot of other schools. There are several others with double digits. It's a good number, but I just wonder about the nickels across the country and if they get shortchanged like Notre Dame seem to.
Yeah, I think obviously Kaiser and Mitchell Evans and Watts will do very well at the combine. We'll be curious to find out how Ben Morrison's health is coming along
right,
and how
right.
much he can even do, or if he will only do interviews and meet with teams, but not really do any of the physical stuff. To your point on who didn't make it, I was a little disappointed that Chris Mitchell didn't get an invite because I think he would test well. I think he could probably run well. And I think he's a guy that should be intriguing to people just because of how much production he had and because we saw him make some contested catches and we saw him with some ability to run and get behind defenses. And so he's one. Yeah, I certainly agree on Clark, and I'm a little surprised he's not there. And then I'm surprised on Mitchell, but I do think that Mitchell Evans will. That's probably my guy that people aren't talking about enough at his position group that I think can come out of the combine having really improved his stock.
Yeah, I think I got to stick with Kaiser after 3 years of talking about Jack Kaiser's hidden measurables. That guy has dominated linebacker room measurables for a couple seasons now. And I think, JB, I know we know this about Riley Leonard, but it was Riley Leonard and Bo Collins that had the best testing numbers on the offense in the summer.
Yeah.
Because we're like, well, that's great, except they brought in two transfers from the ACC that have better testing numbers. But it was really good to hear that, like that. I think Collins mentioned he's so competitive, he wanted to compete with me in every single test.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And he threw up some big numbers. Riley Leonard did. He was right there in some of the vertical leap stuff. I think Bo Collins, maybe they said leaped like 40 and a half or 41 inches over the summer for Notre Dame. Yeah, those guys will go down there, compete. They'll show well. But when you see some other teams that had 14 invitees, you certainly are allowed to wonder why Notre Dame maybe didn't get 10, specifically with the two we've mentioned.
Yeah,
And TP, to your point about Nichols, like those guys are a little undercover compared to Jordan Clark in the national championship game. I know that's not how personnel directors look at this, but Jordan Clark was well known by the
yeah,
masses during the
no
season.
doubt, no doubt about it. And certainly Riley Leonard, he's going to run he'll run well. The agility stuff will be great.
He'll jump great.
Yeah, no, he'll jump really well. But he is quarterback, and he's going to have to throw the ball, and he's going to have to throw it accurately, and that's what I mean. I think everybody in the country, if you've watched enough of Notre Dame games, you know that athletically, Riley Leonard's going to do great at the combine. Can he be accurate and really, really precise at the combine? If he is, his stock is going to go up very, very high.
We'll be back with segment two, burning up the boards.
Segment two, burning up the boards. We start with a question from Utah Domer. Who is still in the mix for the recruiting coordinator job or any other key front office roles? I will insert here player personnel is director of player personnel is another opening. Kenyatta Watson, JB, that looks like that's not going to happen for Notre Dame for player personnel director.
Yeah, Notre Dame offered him the job. I know when Notre Dame had Mike Martin on campus, it had expressed some confidence that it was going to get things done with both Martin and with Kenyatta Watson. He's at Auburn. He's their director of recruiting and strategy. He's elite. I discussed him on the podcast Thursday. But as things have gone on, certainly in talking with Auburn officials over the weekend. He'd given no indication that he was exiting the Plains. And when I talked to some more folks last night who were very close with Kenyatta, they thought that it was trending toward him staying at Auburn. Anything could happen, but the fact that he canceled his visit to South Bend that was scheduled for midweek, he was supposed to be on campus at the same time as Mike Martin. So the fact that he canceled that, I posed the question to more than a couple of people that I talked to over the weekend. When's the last time you signed a 5-star recruit who canceled his official visit? And that's kind of
That's a
that's
good
kind
point.
of that's kind of how I'll continue to view this situation. But again, Notre Dame doesn't have to be in a dire hurry to fill this spot. They filled the GM spot. That was most important. And they will have a lot of people that are interested in this spot. There's also still some schools out there who are filling general manager positions. And so you may wait and see a little bit more on the player personnel side of things, depending on how some of those positions shake out, specifically Oklahoma and Georgia Tech. I know that Florida made a hire from the NFL last week, hired the Polk guy from the Atlanta Falcons. And I think Clemson made a similar hire with Kevin Kelly, who had also NFL experience. And so that's kind of where things are going right now. And don't ignore the fact that Mike Martin will have some say in this as well. So now that he's coming on board as GM, he'll have some input into this position, and I think he'll also potentially be able to hire not one but two people based on some conversations I've had.
I think that's a good point, John, because you know he will have influence and connections. Mike Martin, that is, that can facilitate the filling of these spots. You want to coordinate, or I'm sorry, you want to maybe straighten out what the actual situation is with, as it relates to a recruiting coordinator.
Yeah, I mean, you can title it any number of things. I mean, officially, Notre Dame has lost Chad Bowden, that was its associate AD and general manager, and it lost Zaire Turner, who was director of player personnel. Caleb Davis has the director of recruiting title now. Carter Allman was basically the assistant GM. And Becca Seitz is maybe like on campus recruiting coordinator. So, but again, that title can be director of player personnel. Some people have executive director of recruiting operations. There's so many different ways you can title it, but that person will slot in and kind of fill your top recruiting role.
2 years ago, before he was hired as general manager, recruiting coordinator title was one of Chad Bowden's titles. It changes.
Yeah.
I find it interesting how much it's going to change in the next few years too. We had a question we should include on a future podcast so we can research it about, is Mike Martin going to need regional scouts? Can you name regional scouts to help you out in terms of your, I mean, no, think of the transfer portal, and there's a lot out there. Do you invest money in your staff into regional scouts because he has more things going on? Or maybe that's for the recruiting coordinator needs regional scouts now. I find it's going to keep changing in the next couple of years. Just
Back in the old days, you had regional scouts, but those were just people in another line of work that Notre
right,
Dame would
right.
would tap into, and they would kind of help coordinate like recruiting in Southern California or various spots throughout the country. It's a little bit more complex than that now.
From Amos Irish, he has a question about CJ Carr. What have you or the staff seen from him that has created such a buzz? Who would you compare him to? And why is there a feeling, even though he's done nothing on the field, that Indy trusts him to be the guy?
I know that we've mentioned this several times about the scrimmage that they had the week before the Blue Gold game last spring, and the media was invited. We were in the press box. It was, obviously a fairly quiet environment, and then the ball came off the hand of CJ Carr, and I can be pretty expressive. I know that I gave out some type of gasp about the way the ball came out of his hand and got to the receiver. I don't really know how to explain it. Comes out of his hand beautifully, floats through the air in a very aesthetic way, and it seems to arrive at the receiver in a way that is accommodating for the receiver to make the catch. There's just something about the way the ball comes off the hand and gets to the receiver that seems a lot different than other guys you normally see.
For me, it was, certainly that scrimmage was eye-opening. It was talking to people over the course of camp and just hearing, and you go all the way back even to the late May luncheon with Marcus Freeman when he sort of alluded to KVA and said, okay, with CJ, you're like, oh, well, he's doing it against the fours and the threes. Let's move it on up. And then to Marcus' point, he said, we moved him up and he kept doing it. We put him in there against the twos and he was still having success. And I think that's significant because those twos in particular played a lot of football last year for Notre Dame. Another point for me would be it was actually one day in the IAC, and it wasn't just a single instance, but there's one throw in particular that I remember when they were doing some early stuff, maybe some 7-on-7, and he just was able to drop it in past the second level in front of the third level defenders. And it was just a really nice, maybe only a 20 or 25-yard completion, depending on what the receiver did with it after the catch in a live game setting. But it was the way he threw it over, I want to say, a Jack Kaiser and in front of members of Notre Dame's starting secondary. And it was just this beautiful throw that the elite quarterbacks have to make because the defensive coverages are so difficult and they're so balanced and they're disguised so well, particularly when it was an Al Golden defense being deployed by a bunch of guys who had been in it for the third year. So for me, it's seeing it. Yeah, we haven't seen it in a game. That's the next step, or even seeing it managing the full offense against the full defense. Certainly those are elements to see, but the ball's different when he throws it, and it's more precise and it's got this great spin to it, and it's just more accurate.
He's inexperienced, not playing, but year two. He's in year two, not year one. You can expect things from your redshirt freshman quarterback in year two of your offensive coordinator, Mike Denbrock's system. He throws the ball better than anybody at Notre Dame since Jimmy Clausen. That doesn't mean you're going to be a great college quarterback. It took Jimmy Clausen 3 years to be a great college quarterback. And CJ Carr, like Marcus Freeman, will be better in year 2 and 3 than year 1. But you got something in CJ Carr. Throwing the football and managing an offense and knowing how to put it there. Notre Dame fans have something in CJ Carr. It's a good thing that you can have hope for John Bryce's homegrown quarterback, right?
Gotta happen, boys.
Yeah. Question from Arrow Fan 624. Have you all heard anything about the $20 million college football playoff money, how it will be allocated within the Notre Dame athletic department?
Shout out Aerofan 624. I like this question a lot, and I have some information that may not exactly pertain to the 20 million, but also sort of goes into all of this, both the playoff revenues, the impending House settlement that we've already directly asked Pete Bavacqua about. And so my understanding is you can expect Notre Dame to go to 95 scholarship spots on its football roster coming up. And in total, I'm told that Notre Dame is going to add almost 20 full athletic scholarships moving forward. And part of that certainly is due to the revenue coming in from the CFP. Part of that is examining things as you move forward to participate in the House settlement. And part of that is if you're going to add 10 to football, then you got to make sure your Title IX numbers line up everywhere else on campus. And so maybe there's one or two more women's scholarships total on campus right now than men's. And that's why Notre Dame could potentially add 10 football scholarships and 9 scholarships elsewhere, which is kind of what I was told to look for. So there's a huge chunk of money right there. Notre Dame is going to be a full participant in the revenue share. It increasingly looks like it will pass on April 7th. That's when it'll get really real. July 1st is when those distributions can begin if you opt into the revenue share. And that's when Notre Dame, again, they have all the stuff in-house. Scott Connors is kind of running all of that. That's one of the people that Mike Martin met with last week, by the way, because he's running the in-house NIL and all of that. So that's when Notre Dame will kind of start revenue distribution as long as it passes that next final hurdle with the April 7th ruling from the judge. And then that's where a lot of this money is going towards. I mean, obviously, Notre Dame is fundraising to build the Shields Family Football Hall. And if you haven't been on campus, it's mind-blowing to see how much concrete's already been poured. And they've got, full 2 stories of concrete poured and that building framed in between the Goog and the IAC. It's incredible to see the progress. Again, it's not going to be ready until sometime in 26, but it's certainly remarkable to see the progress there. So that's where a lot of the money is going to right now. Also, and I expect to have more on this in Football Scoop and certainly share it here probably on the pod in the coming week. if not this week, then sometime before the end of the month. A lot of that money, frankly, is going to go to pay staff and coaching bonuses, and I'm doing some digging there, but it's substantial. The longer these guys go in the playoffs, the fatter the coaches' bonuses get, and there's some pretty big ones getting ready to be paid out.
For fans listening, the 95 scholarships instead of 85. Right now, they have 95 scholarship players on my chart. I think any school in Notre Dame's position will lose a couple more players at the end of the spring due to graduate transfer, medicals, and regular transfer than they would bring in. Whether that means you lose 2 more or lose 6 more, I don't know. But that would leave spots for 10 to 12 walk-ons. They have 118 players now. So you're looking at 13 players that will not be on the team next year, assuming this passes. That's tough. That's a tough situation because they had a really good walk-on program, and some of those walk-ons are going to take scholarships from the older, not the younger, I don't think, the older scholarship players going forward.
And if I could just add one more quick thing, and this may be something we end up doing in the summer, TO, kind of like some of those summer video series that you had last year that I thought were a brilliant idea by you and a nice ad for Irish Illustrated viewers and people who check us out on YouTube. I do want to add, that's a great point. Coaches around the country, this is not new news. They're really worried about what's going to happen to those walk-ons. There's also a lot of coaches who believe the exact term I was used was there's about to be some really serviceable players walking the streets
Yes.
when this goes through, because some people have, to your point, whether it's Notre Dame or Nebraska or some of those places that have had these really healthy walk-on programs, a lot of people have been willing to give up a playing career to be on the team at some of these places, and that's not going to be the case anymore. So that is going to be a negative impact, in my opinion. Yeah, it was put to me that they would probably be looking at having to pare down 15 guys by the time camp rolls around, and you've got to be at that 105 roster limit. I would also note, and I didn't know this till last week, and I checked with multiple GMs around the sport, including some in the SEC and another power conference. Now with those 95 scholarships, if that's what you go to, you're going to be able to give out partial scholarships. So actually, you could have a 105 person roster, and all 105 could be getting a part of a scholarship. I did not realize that. They
Wow.
don't have to stay. They don't have to stay whole. They're going to be able to be parceled out, much the way that baseball or softball or volleyball or some of these other sports are handled.
With NIL, you can do that.
Right.
Because if you're making $1 million and you're a graduate student at Notre Dame, you don't need your full scholarship. You would if you're the freshman coming in that's making whatever the freshmen coming in are currently making. We have a two-parter here, Priester. It is all about Mike Denbrock. From DS Chai 8391, first, much has been made about next year's team maybe taking a step back in terms of defensive efficiency due to the change in coordinator. But are we underestimating the possibility of the offense taking bigger steps forward because of year 2 under Mike Denbrock? And ND Squid 23 notes that by almost any metric, Notre Dame's offense was top 10 last year. That said, Notre Dame saw its real jump in defensive performance from year 1 to year 2 with Golden. Do you see a similar jump with Mike Denbrock, and why?
Yeah, I mean, this is a scenario that occurs all across the country on a regular basis. The second time through for Mike Denbrock should be better. Now, of course, he's going to have a new quarterback to break in one way or another, and so that's a factor. As it relates to the defense and the defense with not only with a new coordinator, but I don't care how much talent you have coming back. When you lose the leadership and talent of Xavier Watson, Jack Kaiser, and Benjamin Morrison, and Riley Mills and Howard Cross, there's a transition period. There just is. And we've talked in recent, I think within the last week about, the leadership and captains. Who is that all going to be? But yes, it's about Mike Denbrock and the offense. I will remind people two things. Number one, the offensive line is going to be better when they start the season next year, provided there are no, real major physical setbacks. And the second thing I'd point out is that in the playoffs, when it really matters how you evaluate an offense or defense and the statistics, and Notre Dame did not have 400 yards total offense in any of the playoff games, and they scored 27 points against Indiana, 23 against Georgia, 27 against Penn State, 23 against Ohio State. So they need to make a jump. In the second year of the Mike Denbrock, run offense will be better, and it really starts with that offensive line.
Yeah, I think I don't know that we're not maybe giving enough credence to what year two can be under Denbrock, because I do think that offensive line, if you're going to have a young offensive line, you don't want to do it with a first time starting quarterback. So
Right.
the scenario in that regard unfolded pretty ideally for Notre Dame, that they had a mobile quarterback who'd played a lot of football in Riley Leonard this past season, while they tried to bring along an offensive line, one that ended up getting fairly besieged by injuries and shuffling some people around, and all of that. But now next year, we're all in uniform agreement that this will be a definitely improved Notre Dame line, and has a chance, I firmly believe, to be an elite offensive line in college football next year. That's best case scenario for your first time starting quarterback. I do expect growth and a step forward in Notre Dame's offense. Doesn't mean it will be there statistically, because of all the things we've outlined that TP did a great job of outlining. But it also might mean we just see a more efficient offense, because T.O. probably has the stats handy, and if not, he did a great job of chronicling it over the course of the season. Too often we saw Notre Dame score off that scripted opening possession and then go dormant on offense, and I just don't think we're going to continue to see that moving forward. I think that will be one of the biggest efficiency markers for Notre Dame offense in 2025. We'll probably be charting their second possession and comparing it to their second possessions in 24.
Tim Priester, I think it will fall on deaf ears this time if you caution the fans about the offensive line in the first game. Whereas, as opposed to being totally correct for September when you tried to bring that up with Joe Rudolph shuffling his line, it will appropriately fall on deaf ears if we try that again,
Well,
because the offensive line has to start as a strength.
and it should fall on deaf ears.
Yeah.
Now, again, you could run into some adversity that makes it a little bit more difficult. But as you look at the way they developed this year and what they have coming back next year, you lost some depth, obviously, with some guys that were quite heroic and stepping up and filling in when injuries occurred. But no excuses, at least now, as we look at the configuration of the starting offensive line this fall. Irish Cheesehead asks, assuming the GM has a say, do you expect Mike Martin to look to implement a Lions-like roster? He says offensive line, defensive line, high motor, gritty, kneecap biters, etc. Seems to be like such a perfect fit, given how players already seem to love playing for Marcus Freeman and shouldn't have any trouble at all buying in.
I want to answer this one first because I think Marcus Freeman has implemented a Lions-like roster, offense and line,
Yeah, I think
defensive line based, high motor, gritty kneecap biters. Because you mentioned heroic efforts by guys that transferred out. If Rocco Spindler and Pat Coogan aren't quote unquote kneecap biters and gritty, I don't know what they are inside. And they have had the 2020 team for Notre Dame. I want to give credit where credit is due. Had this a little bit too. That's why they made the playoff. And the 2024 team had this for Notre Dame. They fought tooth and nail for everything they could do. And it's going to be an easy transition that way for Martin because he has those guys on the roster. And that's what Marcus Freeman wants to recruit, I think, going forward.
Yeah, I mean, Marcus Freeman has said repeatedly, Team Glory was new to 24. What's not new is that Marcus Freeman had says consistently, I want this to be an offensive line and defensive line driven program. And I think that we've seen the Lions in a lot of ways become that, along with some strategic weapons and things that they do. So, yeah, I think this is another case where, again, they hit it off last week after they talked on the phone and found that they really hit it off when they were in person and Mike was around everybody. And he sees, Notre Dame has expanded its football organization in recent years. And I think that sticks out when you bring a guy in like Mike Martin, who probably saw it 10 years ago when it was much more bare boned in some of those recruiting and personnel departments.
From Rye Guy 0917, we have Purdue, NC State, at Boston College, Navy, at Pittsburgh, Syracuse, and at Stanford. ND should be a decent sized favorite against all these teams next season. Which will be the gamer games that has ND fans nervous going into the fourth quarter?
Yeah, I think two jump out at me now. And again, we barely know anything about Notre Dame, let alone other teams that Notre Dame is playing. But I mean, I'm not going to say Purdue. Barry Odom is a more experienced coach than what Purdue had. I think they'll be better. But the two that come to mind are NC State, which comes after at Arkansas and Boise State at home.
Yeah.
Plus, NC State had a down year last year, and Dave Doran has been pretty good here in the last 5 years or so. So I expect them to bounce back again, not really knowing about their personnel. Although I didn't think that they're again doing those transfer portal stories. I didn't think that NC State really did an outstanding job or a great job of adding people. But NC State, and then the other one that I would say is it looks like Syracuse has it going on with their second year head coach, and that comes late in the year, last home game of the year, after traveling to Pittsburgh the week before, which will undoubtedly be, whether it's competitive or not, that's not the point. It'll be a lot more physical because that's the nature of a Pat Narduzzi team. So those would be the two that I pick out of that group that were suggested.
Wait, TP, that's really I love that observation
Did I
on
do a good
Syracuse.
job there, JB?
I love that observation on Syracuse. Well, you always do a good job, TP, but
Just not
I'm
about Syracuse usually. Good job.
yeah, that was, I mean, that's a great point. And they lose Kyle McCord, but Fran Brown's got a lot of juice in
Yeah, it
that
does.
program right now. Now, they also just lost the receivers coach to Oregon, and people played really hard for him. He's considered maybe one of the top up and coming wide receivers coaches in college football. I'm not saying that's a huge deal. I'm just pointing that out anecdotally because we're talking about Syracuse right now. I'd be a little concerned about USC because it comes at the end of 6 consecutive weeks of playing. And so that's one that immediately jumps out to me. I would be more concerned about Syracuse if it was at the whatever the air conditioning unit is called now. Um, but that's a great point about Syracuse because certainly we think Fran Brown has it going in the right direction. And then, I don't know if the question is pertaining to somebody like Arkansas or not, but with the green guy back at quarterback, and they were able to hang on to their defensive coordinator last week after Ohio State came sniffing around. That'll be a wild game, I would imagine, going into the fourth quarter at Arkansas. So, and then obviously the opener at Miami is, no matter how much we all think, whether it's CJ Carr or Steve Angeli, no matter how much we all think that Notre Dame can go win a lot of games with that person at quarterback, that's still going to be a fever pitch setting because Miami is going to enter this season so incredibly desperate and in such a need of an immediate statement win because they've not had the improvement as quickly as everyone expected, Mario Cristobal himself included, with Cristobal at the helm there.
I think of these seven kind of heavy favorite scenarios, NC State is mine because it's in the worst possible spot on the schedule. Between Boise State and USC, it's not awesome actually for the entire Notre Dame experience for fans for a raucous crowd too, because you're coming to Boise State or you're coming to USC or you're coming to Texas A&M. So I think NC State gets the short shrift there, and I will reveal my number two from that list in July music. Tim Priester, I am
Oh,
going to go ahead and withhold that.
if I could, yeah, I did a terrible job of answering that question because I misunderstood it. I thought
I
they were
think
going to,
Miami will be a tough game too, John. If that's what you want to say, there is.
yeah, I think they were basically saying chalk those up as expected wins, and where do we go from there? I would say the physicality of Pitt would be huge. I think NC State's a team on the decline, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Notre Dame win that game by 3 or more touchdowns.
We have a question from Wake 'em Up 408. In your opinion, how does evaluating high school talent for the college game differ from evaluating college players for the NFL? Should we expect Mike Martin to come in firing on all cylinders with evaluations, or do you expect there to be an adjustment period when he's recalibrating his benchmarks, for lack of a better way to put it, to fit what's needed at this level?
I mean, it's tougher for him. I guess, yeah, he has to recalibrate a little because I should go to the CJ Carr Marcus Freeman thing. They'll be
He's
better
been
in
in
year
the
two and
NFL
three than
for a
they
long
will be
time.
in year number one. So he'll be better at it in year three than he will be in year number one, too. But I much prefer this method of it. The guy that's been scouting NFL players and college players coming down to scout high school players than the other way around. I think this is, I think he'll adjust quickly. And yes, he will feel much more comfortable entering 2026 than 2025 doing the same job.
I wonder and believe that all those agree with that sentiment entirely, but I wonder and believe that this will be a chance for Notre Dame to perhaps identify some guys earlier. And Mike Martin's got 2 decades of NFL experience. He knows what good is, he knows what elite is, he knows what it looks like. And so maybe Notre Dame with Mike Martin and pairing him once again with Matt Jansen, who they previously worked together with the Houston Texans. And as I've noted before, Marcus Freeman's called Matt Jansen kind of his secret weapon. So you know there's a comfort level there, and you know he knows how to identify what good is. And so maybe this helps Notre Dame even before a guy's blown up on the recruiting circuit. Maybe as Mike Martin is pouring over some film, or people bring film to him after the back shop has poured over the film, and they think they've got some guys they might want to offer. This is where I think Mike Martin could be a tremendous asset for Notre Dame, just because, again, he knows what NFL players look like, and he's done it for so long. You have to believe he's going to be able to extrapolate that down into high school recruiting and see, even if a guy's not picked up a lot of offers yet, but Mike Martin's going to know what to look for and what to believe in.
Yeah, I like everything both you guys are saying there. I mean, 2 decades of experience in the NFL is invaluable. And I agree with you, Tim. I mean, it's better to be going down to
Yeah.
that level as opposed to up. And I think a guy like this, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but I mean, when you've been evaluating, NFL players, maybe you have the ability to recognize weaknesses a little bit more readily and more easily. As a kid, okay, he's a little bit stiff when he does this. Is that something we can do to improve him? I don't know. I like the choice, and so I don't know him yet. That's why I say I'm really interested to pick his brain a little bit and see how he is going to approach the job. But and I love the Vanderbilt background. I just think that everything that we're reading about him and seeing about him sounds like it's going to work out really well for Notre Dame.
And Notre Dame has had good, not impeccable portal um, evaluations for people they brought in the portal era. I think he'll be very good at
Yeah,
evaluating graduate transfer level talent as well. And I know that wasn't
yeah,
a
it's a
question,
good
but
point.
that's a big part of it. Our next question from Rich Marazzi. Pete Bavacqua, by all appearances, looks like he expects Notre Dame to excel in all male and female sports. I know there is no chance Micah Shrewsbury would not get a third year, but will his leash be shorter than his AD predecessors?
I don't.
Probably worth noting I would not have included this question if not for last night.
Understandable. There's that common theme or the common expectation that, okay, it's a new AD, so he's going to have a quicker leash, or it's not one of his guys. And I generally agree with that, but we are talking about Notre Dame. And so I don't think Pete Bavacqua came in here thinking, you know what, I don't give a damn what Jack Swarbrick thought or who he picked. I'm going to make my own decisions. I don't think that he arrived at Notre Dame with that frame of mind, partly because he came in and had a really nice introduction and indoctrination to the job, spending, the fall of 23 at Notre Dame before he was actually named in that position. So I don't know that that necessarily applies to Pete Bavacqua. I think the fact that Notre Dame is a little bit different than most other places. I'm not sure that applies. And I also think that we need to watch how Pete Bavacqua does the job and let it unfold a little bit before we start passing judgments on quick trigger as it relates to this situation.
Yeah, I think the way things are trending right now, that this looks like the first major um, decision that Pete Bavacqua might be forced to make at some point down the road. But I think that Notre Dame still kind of holds itself to a standard where they've got to show tremendous progress next year for sure, and they've got to be doing next year on the basketball hardwood with the men's program what we thought they would be doing this year, and that is getting into mid to late February in the middle of the pack of the ACC and being discussed as a bubble team. And this bubble burst a long time ago, and they're playing like it. They're very well aware of that. So, but I think you would just have to see a complete bottom drop out for year three to be a juncture point for Micah Shrewsbury.
Yeah, I think year three has to become your new year two, though. You got to the highest anyone reasonably expected Notre Dame to finish this year was mid pack. They got to be able to finish mid pack in a very bad conference next year. More than
I,
mid pack. I mean, I had them 9, I guess. So let's say you got to be able to. I agree with you, Priest. You're putting numbers on it. It's dumb, but that 7, 8, 9 range has to happen in year three. It absolutely has to happen in year
well, and
three
it should, yeah,
conference
you would expect it to be a little bit better this year, so
this
that
year. Yeah,
going into next year, you would actually say, all right, maybe with the supplement of the recruiting class coming in, that maybe you can actually compete for an NCAA tournament berth. Nobody's really thinking in those terms right now. And the biggest problem is that the ACC stinks. And
Right.
so how many bids? Like right now, it looks like they could get five. They could get five. Um, and that's,
That's
I mean,
tough.
are they going to be in the top five next year with the current configuration and the way that this program is performing now? It's really difficult to anticipate that.
Our final question from Matthew Bowles, who we have established Tim Priester. He is not related to Tony Bowles, independently as well.
Ah,
If you could have been on the sideline and in the locker room, either pregame, halftime, postgame, for any one game you've covered, which would it be?
okay. Well, let
Michigan
me
2019 does not count, Tim Priester, just for our readers to want to hear about.
Well, let me, if I could, and I realize I'm dating myself and nobody knows about this. Maybe some people do, but 72 at USC when Notre Dame was hammering USC at halftime, and everything turned around in the second half with Anthony Davis. And there's always been speculation about what was said, what happened in the locker room at halftime. I would love to have been in the locker room at halftime of the 72 USC game, even though that was a negative. And the first one that comes to mind among games that I covered is 88 Miami because, I would love to have heard, Lou Holtz tell his team to save Jimmy Johnson's ass for me. I don't know. I think that would have been a pretty special moment to hear Lou Holtz talking about that.
Anytime you can go in the locker room post pregame fight, Tim Priester, that's the choice right there too.
Yes.
That
Yes.
had to be an emotionally
Yep.
charged locker room beyond belief. JB, how about you?
Gosh, that's a great question. I don't know that I have one overarching game for that. I do from a recency bias standpoint. I would have liked to have been in the locker room in year one under Marcus Freeman for the Clemson game because I think that was such a seminal moment in what Marcus Freeman has now built at Notre Dame. We're continuing to build and elevate at Notre Dame. So that's certainly one. Last year, I should say 2023, I would substitute the USC game for that. That was such a huge game, and you had Caleb Williams and all of that. So those are a little bit more recency bias for me. Otherwise, like as a kid growing up, it probably would have been the '85 Sugar Bowl between Miami and Tennessee when the Canes were maybe ranked two in the country and had a chance to win the national title. And they were a considerable favorite in that contest. It's one of the first games I can truly remember as a kid. And Tennessee just beat the hell out of the Miami Hurricanes, 35-7.
I mean, I think this year would have been Penn State or Northern Illinois. Penn State halftime, I would have liked to have seen that because obviously we've seen part of it. Um, Northern Illinois postgame would have been really interesting to see how that went because we know what unfolded since, but I'm pretty sure Marcus Freeman didn't walk in there as the soothsayer of the program and fix everything the moment that game ended when he was in that press conference. I think that came along as the week progressed. I can't imagine that went as well as everything that went after that came after it. Um, this I have two Tim's gonna laugh at here because they're completely innocuous games where we know kind of what happened. South Florida, the long halftime, where the Dane Christ benching happened and would not have happened without the long halftime. There's a Stanford one in 2011 too, where some guys decided to make business decisions at halftime of that game. I would like to watch those. I made the joke about Michigan, but Michigan pregame 19, I'd like to see what kind of train wreck was happening pregame with that situation would explain everything we don't know about now. But I think USC '05. I came to this game, I didn't cover it. USC '05 pregame would have been pretty special to see because say all you want about Charlie Weiss. Man, did he have that team believing in something going out there against the defending national champs, 36 in a row regular season. That would have been unique to see because that would have been him at his best, quite obviously. I would like to have seen that team that had, what have we said before, had about 20 players, and those 20 players played great that football season. That would have been one for me because they came out on fire in that game. Tim Priester, Miami wins though. Good call. You can't. Anytime there's a fight, I need locker room fights for all these things to happen. Not locker room fights, any pregame fights. They just don't happen as much anymore. It's okay though. It's probably a bad look anyway. That's it for this edition of Irish Illustrated Insider. We will be back Thursday with another. Until then, for Tim Priester of Irish Illustrated, John Bryce of Football Scoop, I'm Tim O'Malley. Thanks for listening.